Imagine, if you will, an absolute master linguist, like somebody who has spent years, maybe decades, just memorizing the dictionary of a foreign language.
Right, someone who really knows their stuff.
Exactly. They've perfected the pronunciation, they've studied all the syntax, they understand, the most obscure verb conjugations imaginable.
The kind of person who sounds flawless on paper.
Yeah. So they step off the plane, they walk up to a local in this bustling marketplace, and they confidently deliver this technically flawless sentence, and they instantly insult everyone in the room.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they haven't just caused a mild misunderstanding. They have deeply, profoundly offended the entire community.
Which is wild when you think about the preparation they put in.
Right. So why does that happen? It's because the most dangerous mistake you can make when delivering a message isn't actually, saying the wrong word.
It's assuming that what is crystal clear in your own culture is going to be perceived exactly the same way in another.
Exactly. You have the right vocabulary, sure, but you are operating from entirely the wrong worldview.
Which is, frankly, a terrifying realization. Especially when you think about how much energy we put into simply translating words.
Oh, totally.
It's this thing we call the illusion of transparency. Like, we walk through the world assuming our intentions are just perfectly visible to anyone who interacts with us.
We think we're an open book.
Right. But those intentions are heavily wrapped in an invisible layer of cultural assumptions. We think we're broadcasting on this universal frequency.
Right, like everyone's tuned into the same radio station.
Yes, but the moment you cross a cultural boundary, you discover that the receiver on the other end is tuning into a completely different bandwidth.
I picture it almost like trying to play a really complex video game, but you're using the controller for a completely different console.
Now, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like you're mashing the A button, thinking you're telling your character to jump because, well, that's what A does on your system at home.
But on this console, the A button triggers an attack.
Exactly. The buttons just do not map to the actions on the screen at all. And you're left staring at the television, completely baffled as to why everything is going horribly wrong when you are, technically pushing all the right buttons.
And that profound, often totally invisible disconnect is the entire focus of the incredibly rich document we are examining today.
Yes, the source material titled 007 Cross-Cultural Competency.pdf.
It is such a remarkable text to unpack.
Yeah.
I mean, it essentially acts as this comprehensive manual for understanding the hidden architecture of human belief.
And communication, too, right?
Absolutely. Now, the document focuses heavily on the Christian missionary context, looking at how the ultimate message of the Christian gospel is supposed to cross these invisible cultural borders.
Right.
But the principles it outlines regarding empathy, meaning-making, and the psychological frameworks governing how different societies process concepts like right and wrong, those are universally applicable.
They really are. And for you listening right now, we are going to explore how to navigate those invisible borders.
Because it's not just about overseas travel.
No, not at all. We'll look at why sheer enthusiasm, just having a really good heart, a ton of zeal, a desire to connect, why that often results in complete disaster if it isn't paired with rigorous cultural intelligence.
Zeal without knowledge is a dangerous thing, as they say.
Exactly. And even if you aren't a missionary crossing an ocean to a remote village, you, the listener, are crossing cultural borders every single day.
Oh, for sure. You might be stepping into a new leadership role at a company that has its own deeply entrenched way of doing things.
Or managing a globally diverse team spanning 4 different time zones.
Or, honestly, just trying to understand the deeply ingrained habits of your new in-laws.
Right. Learning to read culture is basically the ultimate shortcut to genuine connection.
Well, the author actually makes a really compelling argument early on that our modern, hyper-connected world has given us this completely false sense of proximity.
Oh, like because we have the internet, we think we understand everyone.
Exactly. We naturally tend to think of crossing cultures as an issue of geography. You get your passport, you get on a plane, you cross a map, you land in a place where the architecture looks different, and you think, I have crossed a culture.
Check that box.
Right. But the text argues that the greatest distances between human beings are entirely invisible.
Wow.
Yeah, a person can cross an ocean, physically relocate to a new continent, and still remain entirely inside the assumptions of their home.
Which is wild. And sincerity and zeal, while they are, beautiful qualities to possess, They are not omniscient.
They don't magically grant you the ability to decode a new society.
The source material highlights this really tragic dynamic where a worker arrives among a new people group genuinely wanting to help, but they just continue to interpret absolutely everything through categories that belong to the world they just left behind.
Because the problem with sincerity is that it often blinds us to our own ignorance.
Right. If you mean well, you assume you're doing well.
Exactly. If you believe your heart is in the right place, you assume your actions must naturally produce good fruit. But the text gives these fascinating examples of how a gesture meant as profound kindness in one context can be misunderstood as an arrogant insult in another.
Like what?
Well, like how a teaching style that feels super clear, logical, and efficient in a Western boardroom might feel incredibly blunt, childish, or even offensive in a Middle Eastern or Asian context.
Interesting. So culture isn't just a collection of quaint customs or foods or traditional dances?
No, it is the fundamental grammar of a people's life.
Yeah,
It
sure.
tells us how meaning relates to life.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really get our heads around it, the text adapts Edgar Schein's famous iceberg model of culture. And I always appreciate a good visual framework because abstract sociology can get murky very quickly.
Me too. And it's a classic model for a reason. So imagine a massive iceberg floating in the ocean.
Okay, picturing it.
The visible tip, the small percentage that actually breaks the waterline and is visible to the naked eye from a passing ship, that represents the artifacts of a culture.
Artifacts, got it. So what does that include?
These are the tangible sensory things an outsider notices within their first few hours in a new place. It's the style of dress, the architecture of the homes, the flavor of the food.
The music, the specific way people greet each other on the street.
Exactly. The public rituals, it's all the surface level stuff.
It's basically the stuff that makes up a travel vlog. It's what you take photos of on vacation and post online to prove you went somewhere exotic.
Yes. And it is the most accessible layer. But because it's so accessible, it's where most superficial cross-cultural training just completely stops.
Like, hey, don't point with your left hand.
Right. People learn how to bow instead of shake hands, or they learn not to point with their left hand and they think, boom, I've mastered the culture.
But they haven't even scratched the surface.
Not at all. Because right below the surface, you have the second layer, which Schein calls espoused values.
Espouse values. What's an example of that?
These are the declared conscious beliefs of the community. If you sit down with someone and ask them, hey, what does your culture care about? They will give you a list of these values.
Oh, I see. So they might say things like, we value family above all else, or we value respect for our elders.
Right. Or in a Western context, we prize hard work, equality, and independence.
And those espoused values are important, obviously.
They are, but they are often aspirational.
Yeah.
They are what a culture likes to believe about itself.
Ah, so there's a difference between what they say and what they do.
Exactly. And the true danger lies much, much deeper. The massive hidden base of the iceberg, the part extending deep into the dark water, the part that actually sinks ships, is what Schein labels underlying assumptions.
This is the heavy stuff.
It really is. These are the deeply held, heavily ingrained, often completely unconscious beliefs that actually govern behavior. People are rarely even aware of them until an outsider violates them.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about how we operate daily. I mean, you don't walk around consciously thinking about your assumption of linear time, right? You just get annoyed when someone is late to coffee.
That is a brilliant example, and actually one the text touches on directly. Conceptions of time are a classic underlying assumption.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, a Westerner often operates on monochronic time.
Monochronic, meaning time is singular.
Exactly. Time is a resource. It is money. It can be spent, saved, or wasted. A meeting starts at 9:00 a.m. sharp.
Right. Time is a grid we fit our lives into.
Yes. But in many other cultures, time is polychronic. It is fluid.
So what does that look like in practice?
It means the event starts when the important people arrive. The relationship is infinitely more important than the schedule.
Oh, wow.
So if you are operating on monochronic assumptions and your local host is operating on polychronic assumptions, you aren't just going to be annoyed.
Let me guess, you're going to see it as a moral failing. Exactly. You are going to interpret their lateness as a profound moral failing, a sign of extreme disrespect, or a complete lack of commitment.
Returning to our earlier analogy, it's like downloading a translation app on your phone. You might have the perfect vocabulary word, the artifact at the top of the iceberg.
Right.
You might even understand the espoused value of the conversation. But if you don't understand the grammar of meaning, the history, the emotion, and the deep assumptions behind the word at the very bottom of the iceberg, you're just making technically correct noise.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't actually communicating, you're just transmitting data into a void.
And this leads to a really critical point the author makes. Urgency without understanding causes catastrophic damage.
Because you're rushing in blind.
Right. When a messenger, particularly in a missionary context where the stakes are viewed as eternally high, only addresses the tip of the iceberg, they invariably misdiagnose the problems they encounter.
They treat the symptom while completely misunderstanding the disease.
Yes. And the document outlines a deeply illustrative scenario regarding communication patterns and silence that I think perfectly captures this misdiagnosis in action.
Oh, I remember this part. It's so profound. So imagine a highly motivated Western missionary, right?
Okay.
They come from a culture that values directness, individual autonomy, and quick, decisive action.
The standard Western playbook.
Right. So they gather a community, they present a theological message passionately, and then they ask for a response. They want a decision right then and there.
And what happens?
The community responds with absolute silence.
So the missionary, using their own cultural controller, hits the silence button.
Exactly. And in their Western context, silence in a meeting usually means one of two things: extreme awkwardness or flat-out rejection.
Right. So they assume the silence means we reject what you're saying or we are totally indifferent to your message.
The missionary interprets the silence as spiritual hardness. They might go home and write back to their supporters saying the people are stubborn or resistant.
Which is a tragedy, because if they had the cultural intelligence to look at the underlying assumptions, the bottom of the iceberg, they might realize they're dealing with a deeply communal, perhaps honor-based society.
And in that specific culture, decisions of any real weight are never, ever made individually on the spot.
Never. In fact, making a quick individual decision might be seen as arrogant or foolish.
Wow.
Precisely. In that context, silence might actually be a sign of profound respect for the weight of the message.
Wait, so the silence is actually a compliment?
Yes. It might be the community's way of saying, what you have just shared with us is so significant, so worldview altering, that we cannot possibly give you a flippant answer right now. We must take this away, sit together over meals, discuss it with our elders, and reach a consensus as a community.
That is heartbreaking when you think about the mechanics of that misunderstanding.
It really is.
The missionary thinks they are failing, they think they've hit a brick wall, but they might actually be succeeding beyond their wildest dreams. The message might have landed perfectly.
Right, but because they misread the silence, they pivot, they get impatient.
They start pushing harder. They raise their voice. They demand a show of hands. They push for a visible, immediate decision to create what they perceive as momentum.
And that is the exact moment they snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. By pushing for an immediate, individualistic response, they violate the deep cultural norm of communal harmony.
So now they're just insulting people.
Pretty much. The people grow wary. They look at this outsider and they see someone who is impatient, who doesn't respect their elders, who doesn't understand how trust is actually built, and who is actively disrupting the social order.
And the tragedy the text points out is that the people aren't necessarily rejecting the religious message at all. They are rejecting the manner in which the message is presented.
The messenger has inadvertently become a biggest barrier to their own message.
Because they confuse their own cultural habit, the Western obsession with quick, individual, measurable decisions with universal truth. So this sets up a massive problem. If human sincerity inevitably hits this massive hidden underwater wall of cultural misunderstanding, how do we ever bridge the gap? Like, are we just doomed to talk past each other forever?
Well, thankfully, the source material doesn't leave us stranded in this sociological despair. It actually points to what it considers the ultimate historical blueprints for crossing cultures.
Right. It grounds this not just in sociology, but in deep theology.
Yes. It looks at the concept of the incarnation of God and the historical example of the Apostle Paul.
The author makes a really compelling pivot here. They argue that cross-cultural competency isn't just a modern sociological trick developed by HR departments in the 20th century.
No, for the Christian messenger, it is a deeply theological mandate. It begins with the doctrine of the incarnation, the foundational Christian belief that the divine word became flesh and dwelt among humanity.
And the text emphasizes a really fascinating point about that. God didn't shout from the heavens as an abstract floating oracle.
He didn't drop a dictionary of universal, context-free divine facts from the sky.
Right. He didn't just carve a universal PDF of theology into a mountain and expect everyone to just sit down and read it.
Exactly. He entered a fiercely specific human world. The historical Jesus was born into first-century Jewish life. He lived under the grinding reality of Roman imperial occupation.
And he didn't speak some universal angelic language either.
No. He spoke Aramaic, a highly local idiom. He participated in the cultural artifacts of his day. He ate the local food, wore the local clothing, and observed the local customs.
And when he taught, he didn't use abstract philosophical syllogism.
Right. He used parables deeply rooted in the agrarian economy of his listeners.
So he talked about planting wheat, about the devastating reality of debt in a peasant economy, about fishing nets on the Sea of Galilee.
And about the intricate dynamics of honor and shame in Middle Eastern family life. He met people in forms they could actually carry, remember, and obey.
He adapted his communication to fit the specific cultural fishbowl of the people he was talking to. He used their grammar of meaning.
The text calls this the scandal of particularity. God is not afraid of human culture. He does not bypass it. He intentionally enters it.
Which sets the absolute pattern for the messenger.
The logic of the document is so clear here. If God himself accommodated his message to fit human culture, then a human messenger cannot act as though cultural accommodation is somehow beneath them.
Oh, that's such a good point. It is the height of arrogance to demand that a listener learn your culture to understand your message, when the divine blueprint was exactly the opposite.
Exactly. It reframes the entire concept of adaptation. It's not compromising the message, it's following the original operational model.
But the text provides an even more specific, practical masterclass in how this looks when a human tries to do it. It points to the story of the Apostle Paul in Athens, found in the biblical book of Acts, chapter 17.
Ah, yes. This is perhaps the most famous case study in early cross-cultural communication.
So Paul arrives in Athens. Now, to understand the weight of this, we have to understand what Athens was in the first century, right?
Right. It was no longer the political capital of the empire that was Rome, but it was absolutely the intellectual, philosophical, and cultural center of the ancient world.
It was the Oxford, the Harvard, and the Paris of antiquity all rolled into one.
A city full of Stoic and Epicurean philosophers, endless debates, and a staggering number of idols and temples.
And the text notes that Paul, coming from a strict Jewish monotheistic background, is deeply distressed by the rampant idolatry he sees. I mean, it physically bothers him.
But his response is what the author focuses on. He doesn't stand on a street corner and start angrily shouting slogans.
He doesn't go around with a hammer smashing statues.
No. He begins with a rigorous observation. He practices what modern sociologists would call ethnographic listening.
So he basically restrains his immediate emotional reaction in order to understand the context.
Exactly. He walks the streets. He pays close attention to the artifacts, the temples, the statues, the inscriptions. He listens to the espoused values being debated in the marketplace.
He takes the time to map the underlying assumptions of the Athenian worldview.
Right. He reasons in the synagogue with the Jews. He talks in the agora with anyone who happens to be there. And eventually, his ideas catch the attention of the intellectual elite.
And he is brought to the Areopagus, the Mars Hill Council, the very center of public philosophical discourse.
And here's where his cultural intelligence truly shines. When he stands up to speak to these elite Greek philosophers, he doesn't start by quoting the Hebrew scriptures.
Why not?
Because they don't care about the Hebrew scriptures. To them, the Torah carries zero authority.
It would be like a guest speaker at a modern scientific convention trying to prove a point by quoting a random fantasy novel.
That's a perfect analogy. Instead, Paul begins with a point of contact drawn directly from his observations. He says, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious."
He points to one of their own artifacts, right?
Yes, an altar he noticed while walking the city, which bore the inscription, "To an unknown God."
It is a masterstroke of rhetoric. He acknowledges their spiritual hunger. He validates their search for the divine without validating the specific idols.
And then he does something truly radical. To support his argument about the nature of the creator God, he actually quotes their own pagan poets.
He quotes Epimenides and Aratus, saying things like, "In him we live and move and have our being, and we are his offspring."
Wait, hold on. Let's pause right here because I really need to push back on this. This sounds incredibly risky.
How so?
If Paul is pointing to an altar built for a pagan god, and he is quoting Greek poets who originally wrote those lines in honor of Zeus.
Right.
How is he not crossing the line into endorsing their religion? In a modern context, that would be like a Christian missionary using verses from a fundamentally opposing religious text to preach the gospel. How does the author of our document justify that without it being syncretism, just blending two religions together until they mean nothing?
That is the exact tension the text addresses, and it is a brilliant question. The text makes a profound distinction between a bridge and a destination.
A bridge and a destination. Okay, break that down.
Oh, Paul is not endorsing Zeus. He is recognizing that the Greek poets, in their observation of the natural world and human existence, stumbled upon fragments of universal truth. The truth that humanity is dependent on a higher creator.
Ah,
Paul uses elements of their culture, the altar, the poetry, as a bridge. He demonstrates that he is fluent enough in their worldview to establish common ground. He meets them where they are.
he shows that he has done his homework, he has read their literature.
Exactly, but, and this is the crucial pivot, he doesn't stop on the bridge. A bridge is meant to be crossed.
Right, you don't just set up camp in the middle of the bridge.
Right. He uses their own cultural language to gain a hearing, but once he has their attention, he crosses over to a bold, uncompromising proclamation of his own message. He takes their concept of the unknown God and says, "Let me make the unknown known to you."
He redefines it. He doesn't say, your unknown God is great, just keep doing what you're doing, we're all climbing the same mountain.
Not at all. He pivots sharply. He tells them that this creator God does not live in temples made by human hands, which is a direct challenge to the incredible architecture surrounding them in Athens.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He then calls for universal repentance, announces a coming day of judgment, and proclaims the physical resurrection of Jesus from the dead.
Now, in Greek philosophy, particularly for the Stoics and Epicureans, the idea of a physical resurrection of the body was not just weird, it was intellectually repulsive.
Right, because the physical body was seen as a prison for the soul.
Exactly. Yet, Paul doesn't hide this deeply offensive part of the message just to maintain his popularity. He brings the full weight of his theology to bear.
So he pulls off this incredibly delicate balancing act. He utilizes deep cultural intelligence to get a hearing, but he maintains unyielding doctrinal fidelity.
He doesn't dilute the core truth. He just makes the offense of the cross intelligible to them.
He translates the meaning, not just the vocabulary.
Contextualization, as the text defines it, is not the art of making the gospel less offensive. It is the discipline of making the offense intelligible.
That's a great distinction.
Because if people are going to reject the message, you want them to reject the actual message, right? Not some culturally clumsy, misunderstood version of it.
Absolutely. Paul's example proves that cultural sensitivity and doctrinal firmness are not enemies. When practiced with wisdom, they are inextricably linked.
But that is a serious high-wire act. You have to be deeply fluent in their world, but firmly anchored in your own truth.
And the text warns that modern messengers frequently lose their balance and fall off this tightrope. And when they fall, they usually tumble into one of two very distinct, very dangerous traps.
This brings us to a really fascinating part of the document. Let's delve into trap number 1, which the text refers to as purity without reach, or cultural arrogance.
Trap number 1. Okay, what does that look like?
This trap occurs when a messenger fundamentally confuses their own cultural packaging with the core truth of the message.
Oh, I see.
It is the failure to distinguish between what is an eternal, non-negotiable principle and what is simply a local custom from the messenger's home country.
It's the classic, we've always done it this way back home, so it must be the holy way to do it mindset.
Exactly. And historically, this has caused immense generational damage.
Oh, I'm sure.
The history of global missions is unfortunately filled with instances where missionaries insisted that local people adopt not just a new theology, but an entirely foreign culture. They equated Western civilization with Christianization.
Like package deal. You want the religion, you have to take the culture.
Right. They demanded that converts adopt foreign dress codes, sing translated European hymns set to 18th century Western musical scales, build churches that looked like New England chapels, and adopt highly Western, individualistic leadership hierarchies.
And they labeled all of these cultural artifacts as biblical.
Yes. They basically told people that to follow Jesus, they had to become Victorian Englishmen or 1950s Americans.
Which required converts to abandon their indigenous cultural identity in ways the text forcefully argues were never demanded by the religion itself.
The result of this cultural arrogance is profound alienation. The local population doesn't hear a message of spiritual liberation or divine love. They hear a message of cultural colonization.
The source material actually provides a deeply painful anecdote that illustrates this perfectly, doesn't it?
Yes, it describes a highly zealous missionary who begins working in a tightly knit, deeply communal society in the global south.
Okay, setting the scene.
This missionary is passionate about saving souls. He preaches, and then he demands that individuals come forward immediately to make a private, personal decision to convert.
Right.
He intentionally bypasses the village elders and the patriarchal heads of the families because, to his highly individualized Western mind, faith is a private, personal choice between an individual and God.
He probably assumes that involving the elders would be a violation of personal freedom.
Exactly. He thinks he's protecting their autonomy. But by bypassing the elders, he thinks he's being urgent and faithful to his mission. The community, however, hears something entirely different.
They hear profound disrespect.
Yes. In their worldview, important decisions, especially decisions regarding religion, which impacts the entire social fabric, are never made in isolation. They are communal.
By demanding individual action, the missionary is actively threatening the social cohesion that has held that community together for centuries.
He thought he was delivering the gospel of peace, but he was actually delivering a highly disruptive strain of Western individualism.
And the tragic part of that story is that the community's subsequent resistance to the missionary isn't necessarily a rejection of the spiritual truths about Christ at all.
Right, it's a desperate rejection of the cultural disruption he is forcing upon them.
He made the gospel needlessly offensive by wrapping it in cultural arrogance.
But the document is very clear that overcorrecting for this leads straight into trap 2, which is just as dangerous.
Okay, what's trap 2?
The text calls it relevance without edge, or doctrinal dilution.
Relevance without edge, so the opposite error.
Exactly, and it is incredibly common in modern, highly pluralistic Western societies.
Why is that?
In an attempt to be universally accepted, to avoid causing any cultural offense whatsoever, or just out of a fear of appearing intolerant, the messenger softens the message to the point where it loses its fundamental substance.
Ah, they strip away all the difficult, jagged parts of the theology.
Right, the reality of human sin, the necessity of deep repentance, the concept of divine judgment, or the exclusivity of Christ, all of it gets tossed out.
They just sand off all the rough edges. They run the message through a corporate PR filter until there's nothing left but a smooth, vague, universally palatable sense of moral encouragement.
Yes, it becomes a message of, you're great just the way you are, I'm great, God loves everyone universally and demands nothing, have a nice day.
It devolves into moralistic, therapeutic deism.
The text argues fiercely that the gospel does not become good news by becoming vague.
That makes sense.
If you only tell people they are inherently valuable, but never tell them that they are broken and in need of radical rescue, you are presenting a partial, powerless message.
You might gain a massive audience. You might be loved by the culture, but you haven't actually delivered the truth of the text.
The message just becomes a religious echo of whatever the surrounding culture already believes.
Yeah.
It is accepted precisely because it demands no transformation.
Taking that a step further, it's like a doctor refusing to tell a patient they have cancer because they don't want to ruin the patient's day.
Wow, yes.
The doctor might be very well-liked, sure, but they are absolutely guilty of malpractice.
So true.
So what does this all mean for the listener right now trying to synthesize all this? Whether they are a religious leader, a corporate manager, or just someone trying to communicate across a cultural divide, how do we actually walk this tightrope?
Right. How do we avoid both traps?
Exactly. How do we separate what is a core, unchangeable truth from what is just the packaging of my home culture?
Well, the author insists this requires rigorous critical thinking, historical awareness, and constant, humble self-examination.
We have to interrogate our own assumptions.
Yes, we must habitually ask ourselves, where do I confuse my personal preferences and my cultural upbringing with ultimate truth?
That is a tough question to answer, honestly.
It is. But the expert rule of thumb the document provides is that the core message is content before it is style.
Content before style, that seems like a vital distinction to explore. Break that down for me.
The non-negotiables of the faith, the historical events of the crucifixion and resurrection, the theological claims about grace, human sin, and redemption, those cannot change.
Those are the anchor.
Right. They are the fixed anchor. But the delivery mechanism, The pace of a conversation, the style of the music, the physical posture of prayer, the directness or indirectness of speech, the organizational leadership structures of a church or group, all of those must be entirely fluid and adaptable to the local context.
Because the Apostle Paul understood that he was a servant of the message, not a slave to a particular style.
Exactly.
Okay, so to avoid those twin traps of arrogant colonization and cowardly dilution, the messenger has to deeply, accurately understand the operating system of the listener's soul.
Which brings us to the next section.
Right. And here is where the text gets incredibly practical and, in my opinion, provides the most mind-expanding framework of the entire document.
Oh, absolutely.
It identifies three dominant worldview frameworks that shape all of humanity. It argues that if you don't know which of these three frameworks you are operating in and which one your listener is operating in, you are flying entirely blind.
These are the fundamental lenses through which different societies interpret reality, make moral judgments, resolve conflicts, and ultimately define their deepest human needs.
Okay, let's go through them.
The first of these frameworks is the guilt-innocence worldview.
Let's give these some sticky labels so they're easy to remember. Let's call the guilt-innocence framework the courtroom.
That is the perfect metaphor. In a guilt-innocence culture, which is overwhelmingly dominant in the modern West, heavily influenced by Roman law and Enlightenment individualism, the central question of human existence revolves around moral accountability and objective law.
Right, so the questions are like, have I broken the rules? Have I crossed the line? Am I guilty before a judge?
Precisely. In this framework, sin is viewed primarily as a legal transgression of a set standard.
And the source points out that this specific framework is heavily present in the biblical book of Romans.
Yes, the vocabulary used by Paul there is incredibly forensic.
It's all about law, justice, debt, penalty, and pardon.
And the Christian message answers the deepest fear of this worldview perfectly. Christ pays the penalty, the judge bangs the gavel and declares you innocent, your debt is canceled, you are forgiven, the demands of the courtroom are entirely satisfied.
It is a beautiful and true facet of the message.
It is. The problem is that Western messengers often assume this courtroom framework is the only way to understand the human problem.
They think the whole world is a courtroom.
Exactly. But the document introduces the second framework, which shapes the majority of the non-Western world, the honor-shame framework.
Okay, if the first one is the courtroom, let's call the second one the community.
In an honor-shame culture, the central anxiety of life isn't, did I break an objective rule?
What is it then?
It is, have I disgraced my family? Have I lost face in the eyes of my peers? Do I still belong to the group, or have I become an outcast?
The focus is entirely on social standing, public identity, and relational harmony.
Yes, and the text makes a really fascinating theological move here. It roots this honor-shame dynamic not just in Eastern sociology, but right in the beginning of the Bible, in Genesis 3 with Adam and Eve in the garden.
Oh, right. After they do wrong, their first reaction isn't to ask for a defense attorney to argue their innocence.
No, their immediate reaction is the realization that they are naked and they hide. They feel intensely exposed, humiliated, and ashamed. Their primary fear is a loss of relationship and presence.
Which highlights the danger of cultural blindness we talked about earlier.
Exactly. If you go to someone who is deeply embedded in an honor-shame culture, and you only preach a message of legal pardon, the guilt-innocence message, it just won't fully resonate.
We won't heal their deepest wound.
Right. They might hear your message and say, okay, sure, the cosmic judge says, I'm legally pardoned, my debt is paid, but my family still won't eat with me. I am still defiled. I am still an outcast.
Wow. So the courtroom language just doesn't fix the community problem.
No, it doesn't. For this worldview, the message must highlight how Christ covers their nakedness, removes their disgrace, cleanses the defiled, and adopts the outcast into a new, honorable family.
It's not just about escaping a penalty, it's about restoring dignity and belonging.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this brings us back to the medical analogy from earlier, and we can really flesh it out now.
Preaching a partial gospel using exclusively the courtroom language when the person listening is trapped in the community framework is like a brilliant, well-trained doctor confidently putting a plaster cast on a patient who has come into the ER with a severe systemic blood infection.
Exactly. The cast is a real, valid medical treatment. It is incredibly effective for a broken bone, but it's addressing the wrong wound.
The patient might appreciate the effort, but they're still dying of the infection.
Which perfectly explains why the text insists the messenger must diagnose before they prescribe.
And that diagnosis must also account for the third, major framework, the fear-power worldview.
Right. Let's call this final one the battlefield.
The battlefield. Okay, unpack that.
In a fear-power culture, which is prevalent in animistic societies, many tribal cultures, and honestly, increasingly in various subcultures globally, the world is viewed not as a courtroom and not just as a community.
It's viewed as a battlefield.
Yes, a dangerous field of unseen spiritual forces, curses, omens, ancestors, and threats.
So what's the central anxiety there?
The central, driving question of daily life is, what unseen power rules my life, and who is strong enough to protect me from the powers that want to harm me?
And modern Westerners, steeped in scientific materialism, tend to just completely dismiss this worldview as primitive superstition.
They do, but the text points out that the New Testament, the Gospels, and the book of Acts are absolutely saturated with this language.
It's Jesus constantly casting out demons, calming violent storms, and demonstrating total authority over disease and death.
Right. The Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians that the struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness.
So in a fear-power worldview, salvation isn't primarily a legal pardon, nor is it merely social restoration.
No, it is raw liberation. It is a rescue mission from dark powers. The message must emphasize the concept of Christus Victor, that Christ is the victorious Lord who breaks spiritual chains, disarms demonic authorities, and provides ultimate safety.
So let me make sure I have this right. If you are a Western messenger and you only know how to speak the courtroom language, but you are speaking to someone whose entire life is governed by the battlefield,
Yes.
they might intellectually accept the legal pardon you are offering, but when the sun goes down, they will still be absolutely terrified of the dark.
Exactly. The legal pardon doesn't address their fear of the curse.
If we synthesize these three frameworks, guilt, shame, fear, it reveals the sheer majesty of the source material's central thesis.
The Christian message is described not as a flat, single-issue statement, but as a multidimensional diamond. Different angles reveal different facets of the exact same truth.
True conversion, according to the document, isn't just learning new facts about a celestial courtroom.
No, it is a total, comprehensive worldview transformation. It is moving into an entirely new narrative where objective guilt is forgiven, crushing shame is cleansed, and paralyzing fear is conquered by sovereign power.
That is a breathtaking way to view communication. It demands so much more from the speaker than just handing out a tract or reciting a prepared speech.
It really does.
But realistically, diagnosing whether someone is suffering primarily from guilt, shame, or fear is not something you can accomplish in a 5-minute conversation at a bus stop.
Definitely not. It requires deep knowledge of the person.
Which brings us to a concept in the text that feels profoundly countercultural, almost rebellious, in our modern, hyper-optimized world. The text calls it holy patience.
This might be the most difficult application in the entire document. Holy patience is the grueling discipline of presence before proclamation.
Presence before proclamation.
Yes, in our modern imagination, particularly in the West, we absolutely prize visible, immediate results. We are addicted to metrics, quarterly earnings, measurable success, quick momentum, and immediate responses.
But the author argues that diagnosing the hidden architecture of a culture, finding out what is at the bottom of the iceberg, requires radically slowing down.
Listening is not a delay in the mission. It is the vital, required first step of obedience.
The text makes a really sharp distinction here between two things that might look similar from the outside but are actually opposites: gossip versus ethnographic observation. I found this part incredibly convicting.
It is a crucial distinction. Cultural gossip is what we all default to when we are lazy. It involves collecting fragments of information, a weird food we saw, a strange interaction we had, and using those fragments to create broad, lazy stereotypes.
It says, oh, these people are just always late, or they're also indirect and secretive.
Right. It reduces incredibly complex human beings to a flat caricature. And why do we do this? Because it allows the outsider to feel superior and in control.
It's the fast food version of cultural intelligence. It's cheap, it's quick, and it's ultimately toxic.
True ethnographic observation, on the other hand, is born of humility. It patiently gathers data over a long period of time to seek deep understanding without immediate judgment.
It notices patterns. It asks why people do what they do.
Yes. It pays close attention to what is avoided in conversation, how conflict is resolved, who actually holds the informal power in a room, and what stories are passed down to the children.
There is an incredible, drawn-out anecdote in the text about this very process.
Oh, yes. The missionary in the cautious village.
Right. So a highly trained missionary arrives in a remote, cautious village. He has his strategies, his timeline, and his goals. He wants momentum and visible fruit for his newsletters back home.
Of course.
So he starts preaching loudly in the center of the village and asks for immediate decisions. And the village, operating on entirely different assumptions, responds with polite distance and impenetrable silence.
He hits a wall.
He hits a massive wall. But instead of pushing harder, he humbles himself. He changes his approach entirely. He slows down. He completely stops demanding a response.
And what does he do instead?
For months, he just lives with them. He learns the names of all the children. He sits with the elders and asks them to recount the history of the village. He attends their funerals, which are multi-day affairs, and their celebrations.
He quietly observes how they actually handle decisions and resolve disputes.
Exactly. He engages in the agonizing work of holy patience. And the text notes that then and only then, when he finally speaks the core message again, it lands with incredible transformative power.
Because he finally earned the right to be heard.
He shifted his identity from being an annoying outsider demanding a performance to a trusted guest speaking words that were carried by the weight of actual relationship.
The eternal truth he was speaking never changed. His posture and his relationship to the listeners changed everything.
I want to highlight something profound about that shift. When he demanded an immediate response, he was asking them to trust his words. When he spent months attending funerals and learning names, he was showing them his character.
In most cultures around the world, particularly honor-shame cultures, people do not evaluate the truth of a message purely by its logical consistency. They evaluate the truth of the message by the character and relational loyalty of the messenger.
Okay, but let me put on the hat of the type A goal-oriented listeners out there because I know exactly what they are thinking right now.
Let's hear it.
It feels like we are completely rewiring how we think about efficiency, and honestly, it sounds incredibly inefficient.
I can see how it sounds that way.
If you are a leader brought in to turn around a failing company or a missionary sent by supporters who want to see results, and you are just sitting around having tea and attending funerals for months on end, aren't you failing at your job? Aren't you just wasting valuable time that could be spent actually delivering the message or implementing the strategy?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that tension is exactly why holy patience is so difficult. It forces a complete redefinition of efficiency.
How so?
The text counters that modern corporate mindset by explaining the agricultural logic of the kingdom, which is deeply rooted in the parables of Jesus.
The agricultural logic.
Right. The deepest, most resilient roots grow in secret, underground, over long periods of time. A quick, highly pressured decision is often shallow. It is usually culturally dependent on the intense presence of the outsider.
Oh, I see.
If you aggressively force a plant to bloom out of season, you might get a beautiful flower for a single day, but you haven't grown a tree that can withstand a storm.
You get a great metric to put on your quarterly report to impress your board, but you haven't actually changed the underlying worldview. The moment the pressure is removed, the culture snaps back to its default settings.
Precisely. Holy patience recognizes that trust is the fundamental currency of all human communication. People rarely, if ever, receive a worldview-altering message from someone they do not deeply trust.
And trust cannot be rushed, hacked, or accelerated by a clever strategy.
It is built by consistency, shared meals, enduring difficulties together, and honoring local structures of authority. Holy patience endures the anxiety of waiting.
It earns the right to be heard, so that when the hard truths are finally spoken, they land with the weight of sacrificial love, rather than the sting of an arrogant intrusion.
It's the difference between kicking down someone's front door to tell them their house is messy and waiting on the porch until they invite you in and hand you the key.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it.
And the text makes sure to point out that this agonizing patience is deeply modeled by the life of Jesus himself. We often focus on his 3 years of active public ministry.
Right.
We forget that he spent 30 years in absolute obscurity in a blue-collar town in Galilee. He didn't rush. He asked questions. He lived the life of a peasant artisan. His timing was never frantic, even when people were demanding immediate miracles or political revolutions.
Okay, as we bring this home, let's zoom out and summarize this incredible, expansive journey we've been on through this document.
It's been a lot of ground covered.
It really has. We started by looking at the invisible, dangerous iceberg of culture, how the clothes, the food, and the artifacts are just the tiny tip, while the deeply hidden underlying assumptions about time, silence, and authority are what actually sink our communication.
We then looked at the ultimate blueprint of the Incarnation, the scandal of God entering specific human culture. And we examined Paul's masterclass in Athens, where he modeled how to build a cultural bridge using local philosophy, but possessed the courage to actually cross that bridge to deliver unyielding truth.
We analyzed the twin traps that constantly threaten us. The trap of cultural arrogance confusing our comfortable Western habits with holy truth and colonizing the listener, and the trap of doctrinal dilution, softening the hard edges of the message until it loses its power to rescue anyone.
We unpacked the breathtaking concept of the multidimensional gospel, showing how it uniquely and perfectly answers the distinct, deep-seated human wounds of guilt, shame, and fear.
And we landed on the radical, deeply uncomfortable concept of holy patience, the discipline of ethnographic listening over lazy gossip, where enduring presence must always precede proclamation if we want the message to actually take root.
Which brings us right back to you, the learner, listening to this today.
Yes, you. You may not be a missionary. You may never stand on Mars Hill in Athens. But every single time you step into a new office environment, every time you join a new neighborhood association, or every time you try to build a meaningful relationship with someone from a different socioeconomic or ethnic background, you are stepping into a wildly complex web of unwritten rules and hidden stories.
You are entering a world of meaning that is not your own.
And the highest form of respect you can ever offer another human being is taking the painstaking time to learn their grammar of meaning, to explore the bottom of their iceberg, before you ever demand that they understand yours.
I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
The source material continually asks the cross-cultural worker a piercing question. Where do you confuse your culture with ultimate truth?
I want you to ask yourself that exact question today. Think about your deepest professional or personal convictions. Think about the things you consider to be just obvious, unquestionable common sense.
The way meetings should be efficiently run, the way families should openly communicate, the exact way success and failure should be measured.
What if that common sense is just the water of the specific cultural fishbowl you've been swimming in your entire life?
What would happen if you had the humility to step out of that bowl for a moment, look back at it from the outside, and realize that your way isn't the only way? You might just realize that the most dangerous mistake you can make isn't saying the wrong word.
It's assuming that what is profoundly clear in your world is clear in theirs.
And the moment we realize that, the moment we embrace that humility, we can actually begin to truly communicate.
We really can.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.